So you get it. There are things you need to change, right? Old programming, ways of doing things in your life that just don't serve you anymore. You could keep those rules if you want to, like work your butt off. And if you're not producing enough, throw some more work at it, and maybe that'll do it and you'll get to perfection. But honestly, you're getting a little old for that. You're kind of recognizing this is not working for me. And you want to change some of these old rules that you've been following just religiously for years. And honestly, without even noticing that you were doing it. Well, I bet that you're frustrated because what you're hearing as you go to learn new habits is it's hard, it's effortful, it takes a lot of work, it takes work and effort. And you're kind of like, is that the only way? Well, actually, that's not the full story. Certainly, practice is something that definitely will shift and give us new habits, new ways of thinking about things if we follow through on it, if we keep up with it. But it is not the only way to get there. And I'm guessing if you're a woman in midlife with all that you have on your plate, you'd be interested in knowing what this other way of doing things is, especially if I tell you that it doesn't really take all that much time, right? Well, why don't you just keep on listening to the podcast today, and I will share a little secret with you.
Welcome. This is Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving, a podcast that teaches women in midlife to unapologetically stop silencing their dreams and start designing the lives they want to live in. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie, and as a clinical psychologist of the last 2 decades and a twice divorced single mother myself, I not only know how hard it can feel heading into midlife, I am living it right here with you. I have taken all the many failed attempts and lessons learned in my own life and combine it with my extensive clinical experience to give you the tools you need to make midlife the best time in your life. No joke. So let's get started.
Welcome back, everybody. It's me again, just me. Listen, I have quite a docket coming up in the fall. So I hope that you have pressed follow wherever you get your podcast, because I promise you what you're going to hear is going to be amazing. I've got a list of people that want to be on the podcast after listening to Women Inspiring Women. I've started to do some coaching clients that also will be sharing their stories with you online on our podcast. And of course, there's me, and me talking to you is really my favorite podcast. So I won't be getting rid of these ones because they're my faves. And today I'm kind of excited. This is a little known secret that we know in the psychological community, and the research supports it. So I'm going to put in the notes today some links to some of my favorites in this industry and the topic matter that we're going to talk about today. But I want you to hear this from me because I want it to be shared with you like this is another tool on top of all the other tools that I've given you. Yet this one has kind of this fun little, it's not as hard to do, and it kind of sinks in faster, right? I want you to hear that because if there's some things, like if you listen to last week's podcast, I talked about my own personal meltdown. My favorite thing to talk about, because I have them. And so I like to be authentic with you, but I also like to share kind of firsthand knowledge of this is how this stuff works. But one of the things that I have been playing around with all summer long, and that I wanted to share when I started back up this fall, wanted to share this fact with you because I think that this is kind of an unsung hero of behavior change. And that is hypnosis. And it doesn't mean that you have to go and have somebody, wind a little time watch in front of your eyes and have you follow it back and forth. No, 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 no. Auto hypnosis, meaning hypnosis of self. Like this is something that you can do at home. And the science shows that it can be really useful. And I think that the best way to talk about this is just to give you an example. So I kind of stumbled back into thinking about hypnosis not too long ago when I was working with a coaching client. And here's how it came up. So this is a coaching client of mine that's come back and forth with me for, I want to say like almost since the very beginning of Learn to Love Your Story. And one of the things that she has just enjoyed sheerly, and we always kind of circle back to, is my guided meditation. So I do a whole series in my courses, any of the coaching packages. Even when you sign up for individual coaching, I will be including all of my guided meditations. And they go with different parts of the skill sets that I teach. So there's 5 tenets in the Learn to Love Your Story program, and each of those tenets is broken down into 4 skill sets. And so you're getting a lot of material when you get coaching with me, but I'm a psychologist, so buckle up, Buttercup, and believe me, all of these things work. But one of the ones that she really enjoys the most are the guided meditations. Now, early in my courses, the guided meditations are really just about building up the tolerance for having a mindfulness practice, incorporating that in to your daily activities. And here is someplace where you're not shortcutting. It's actually the active work of doing it every day that makes that stuff work, makes the neurology in your brain start to click into place. So I wouldn't want to give you the impression that I'm going to tell you here's a way to bypass meditation, because meditation is in and of itself, that practice is such a joy, such a form of self-care, such a way to tuck away for just a little bit, and honestly doesn't take more than 5 to 15 minutes a day. Some of us do a little bit more than that, but honestly, if you're in that pocket of 5 to 15 minutes daily, at least once daily, you're going to get the benefits of meditation and mindfulness practice. And if you want to know more about that, head on over to learntoloveyourstory.com. I have a whole section of my blog on self-awareness. You can click on that topic matter and read and watch videos all day long if you would like to. And I also have a course on self-awareness. So I will guide you back over to that. But she and I were having this conversation, and she mentioned yet again something that's really important to her, and it clicked different for me. So what she was saying is, what I really value about these guided meditations is when I'm up against making a big new change, then I go back to your curriculum and I find the guided meditation you paired with whatever that skill set is. And then I just start doing that meditation every single day for a little while. And she mentioned to me that one of her favorite times to listen to the guided meditations is as she's going to bed at night. She's like, I try not to fall asleep, Dr. Natalie, I promise. But she's like, it really, I don't know why, but that seems to be the time that really works. And that clicked. I'm like, of course it did. So there is research that talks about how there are 2 times during the day that we're in a theta wave state of brain functioning. And theta waves are really an interesting place. Theta waves are where we're trying to get our mind to when we're meditating. But of course, when we first start learning meditation and mindfulness, we're really just trying to tolerate, turning our mind back to an activity. It's building up that medial prefrontal cortex. And so the orbital frontal part of the medial prefrontal cortex. And we're trying to create that capacity for catching ourselves when our minds drift off, which is totally a normal thing, by the way, for all of us. And the whole point of the practice of mindfulness is to catch yourself moving away and turn that mind back. That's a repetition, like if you're weightlifting, right? So if you saw me on the video, I did my repetition, arm up, arm down. When your mind wanders and you pull it back, that is a repetition that builds the strength of this neurology or the muscle in your brain that lets you direct traffic of where your mind is going to be, right? So all last week in my podcast, I was talking about compassionate self-awareness. Well, folks, I've been doing meditation at this level for a few years now, real solidly. I would say like about 2019, I started dabbling in it. But since about 2020, I really got serious about it because the science was so clear and I was preaching it. And I was like, I really need to put into practice what I'm preaching here. And as I started the Learn to Love Your Story program, of course, from the ground up, I've embedded it in this. But it's really important that we build that muscle, because if we don't have that muscle, then it's hard to catch ourselves when we drift into our old patterns. See what I'm saying here? So I want to teach you how to get yourself that ability to kind of pull your mind back to a new task, if that's what you want to do. But there's this really interesting thing about theta wave state. Theta wave state is kind of a hyper accelerated learning state. And most children from 0 to about 7 years old are in that brainwave state all the time, right? Now, adults are mostly in beta and alpha wave state. And these are our focused mind states. They help us to kind of stay on track and have that mental to-do list and get to the things that we need to get to. But they also allow for other stuff to be happening in the background. And in fact, like about 90% of what we're doing in our life is the stuff that's happening in the background. Like, you're not thinking about breathing in and breathing out. You're not thinking about how am I keeping myself upright in this chair right now when I'm not resting against the back of it, right? Your body knows, it has body memory for this. And all of that programming is in the background. All right. I just wanted to take a minute and thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this podcast even a thing. It's being downloaded all over the world, which really amazes me, but it also warms my heart because I felt like this is the kind of information that women in their 40s and 50s and 60s need to start hearing. We need to get a fire lit under us, right? But we also need to know how to go in the right direction. And it's hard when you hit midlife and it feels like life is just not clicking. I want to help you have a centered life, to feel like you're thriving and that you love every minute of your life as it is right now. And I promise you, you really can do that. And I am so happy to have you here. So I just wanted you to hear that. Be sure that you're following me in wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss when I drop a new one. And also like and comment. I do listen. If you've commented on these podcasts, you'll see that I start feeding you more information about those podcasts. But guess what, my friends? Some of the programming of things that aren't serving us are also in that background. So, my fellow recovering perfectionists, let me just talk to you for a second here. And I know you're there with me. We love that. We love perfectionism because we got this idea from this, programming and conditioning that we had socially or in our families or whatever, wherever we picked it up, that there was this ultimate way of doing things. And if we could just arrive at that ultimate state, that we would be in some sort of utopia of like, feeling like we had met all of what we needed to meet in our lives. And yet, the basic flaw in perfectionism is that there is no perfect. There is no like actual ultimate way. And so what we get into the mindset of is we're looking for that ultimate way, but because it's not attainable, we're always falling short and we feel like we get stuck in the falling shortness. Now, I don't think the programming and conditioning of perfectionism set out to be so malicious and eat away at our souls in the way that it can. And so I've shifted that programming to a way of thinking that I call, striving for excellence. I want you to strive to certainly be excellent in everything you do. Show up 100,000% if that's what you want to do. That's fine. I want you to. And I want you to know that you always can be doing better. Like that there's also this other piece to the programming that is, and once you attain that, you can be better. And once you attain that, you can be better. And so we're always in pursuit. That I want you to be chained to the pursuit of the excellence and not to the arrival at the excellence. Perfectionism wants you to get to an arrival state, which also isn't really that fun because it's fixed and you don't get to grow and you don't get to get better and improve and, change things up as you age. And so, there's just something about perfectionism that really falls short for all of us. And of course, it feeds into some of these other programs in our life, like shaming ourselves and that inner mean girl coming out and beating us up if we don't meet the muster, right? So I wanted to shift that in my own life to this striving for excellence idea. Now, back to my friend, my coaching client, who was like, oh my gosh, I fall asleep to this. And it really then just really starts to solidify. And it clicked for me. Of course, what she's getting at is that theta wave state happens for us twice naturally. And it's that hyper accelerated learning state. So we're going to catch things faster and put them into action faster. And for my perfectionism friends, like if you were trying to go from a perfectionistic attitude and catch it with your compassionate self-awareness and shift to the excellence, that would take a lot of practice. You would have to be doing that for a long time in your life for it to be natural to go to this, I want to achieve excellence idea, away from the perfectionism idea, especially if you're trying to anchor it to the cues of what formerly I would want to become a perfectionist in, I now want to achieve excellence in, right? Like it's going to take time. And so the reason it works for her when she does my guided meditations as she's falling asleep is that theta wave happens right before delta wave deep level sleep. And we have this moment where we leave that waking awareness, beta wave and alpha wave state, like we are most of the time. And we're in this impressionable, accelerated learning state of theta wave as we fall asleep. The second time, by the way, is as we're waking from the delta wave and into waking state. We also go through that theta wave state. However, harder to catch, right? Like if you're asleep in delta wave, how do you know when you're coming out of it to press play on a guided meditation and catch what you want to catch from that? Of course, there are ways to train your brain to be a little bit more alert to catching that coming up in the morning. And people who like to have records of dreaming and, talk about lucid dreaming or lucid dreaming journaling might talk about using that morning time frame. But my coaching client and I were talking about the nighttime frame. And I said, well, you stumbled into one of these great secrets. Dr. Bruce Lipton is one of my favorite experts in this information. And Dr. Bruce Lipton actually is one of the fathers of epigenetics, one of the original researchers of this principle that stem cells are not programmed, our DNA is not programmed to make stem cells do a certain thing at a certain time without the environment cueing them to do that. So how did he find this out? Well, I mean, it was kind of boring. He had a bunch of stem cells and a bunch of petri dishes, and he'd put a stem cell in a petri dish, and then he'd do something just a little bit different in petri dish A and B and C. And what would happen is petri dish A would become a lung cell, and petri dish B would become a toe cell, and petri dish C would become, something else, right? Entirely. And so what he realized is, OMG, like the blueprint that we've been thinking that this, genetic code is really just kind of a loose recipe for how to make these things. And the environment is integral to making that happen. And if you're in a theta wave state, you can be thinking of yourself as like poised to take that environment and in an accelerated fashion to program yourself to do something different. So he talks about using this hypnosis, hypnotic, auto-hypnotic state as a way to kind of move into new ways of being and new ways of thinking. So one of the things, though, that it occurred to him through his research is, oh my goodness, if we change how we think, we are changing the environment in which the stem cells of our programming are growing, right? And so what he wanted us to really start to challenge ourselves to be thinking, and what he talks about, and I'll link it to him in the notes so that you can go look at some of his stuff too. But what he wanted us to acknowledge is the power that other 10% or so of our conscious aware state has over this 90% of us that's like just program response, just doing the same thing of waking up every day and becoming a Natalie and doing the Natalie things of the day, right? If you really want to go, like I did, from this perfectionism place to achieving excellence and striving towards and being more, committed to the striving than I am to the arriving at something, you have that capacity. You have that capacity to change that completely. And that is the premise of what I teach here at Learn to Love Your Story all the time, right? You've heard me over and over, like, you can change, that's old programming, you can do new programming. But the secret that I'm telling you about today in this podcast is, and you can do it quicker and see bigger shifts in a manner of days rather than weeks and months, if you program yourself during that theta wave state. So you can create that in your meditative states, and you can have kind of a centering thought, which is how I do my guided meditations. But you also can cheat just a little bit if you listen to that as you're falling asleep and you're programming this new stuff into your brain as you're falling asleep. Now, it actually works better. And I was talking to my coaching client about this. It actually works better if you've got like that mantra repeated to you in that state, instead of asking yourself to repeat it back to yourself, because you are drifting off to sleep after all. And I know the interwebs have that stuff too. There's great apps out there, and YouTube is filled with, here, listen to this as you're drifting off to sleep and you'll become a millionaire. Now, I'm not I'm not saying that it can be that literal, but I am saying that this is the mechanism that using that auto hypnosis or that theta wave state that your brain is naturally going to go into as you're drifting off to sleep. This is something that's hugely and uniquely like a tool that you could be putting into practice right now to see change quicker in your life. So for my, perfectionist friends out there, or ones that are trying to recover, and you're trying to practice that new way, you and your therapist have gone through this, or you and your girlfriends have listened to the podcast, and and you want to change this, but it just feels hard and really effortful. Maybe try this. Record yourself, telling yourself that in the present tense, I am always striving to be the best version of myself today, in pursuit of even being an improved version of me into the future. I don't need perfectionism. I know that nobody's perfect, and that's fine. And I'm not throwing away this idea of wanting to be like a super version of myself. I'm gonna program myself to do that.
I've decided to make a big change in my Learn to Love Your Story business. I'm going to start doing individual coaching. People wanted more of an individualized touch, and I get why. So here's the thing. Go to the notes and click on the link to get your free one-on-one coaching session with me. Yeah, that's right, free. And here's how I do this. I have an assessment that I've put together that really helps us to evaluate your midlife and get you back on course to have that centered life where you feel like you're thriving and really loving life as it is right now, not waiting for some epic thing to happen later in your future, but really loving your life that you're in. So I start with that valuation, and we sit down together and have a conversation about it. And I'll set you on the course for where you want to focus your efforts. So be sure that you sign up for your free one-on-one individual coaching session. I'm really excited to be adding this to the whole repertoire of what I do here at Learn to Love Your Story. And I'm really excited to get to know you just a little bit better.
So I've given you kind of this nice, neat idea, right? Here, auto hypnotic state, using the theta wave brain state as you're falling asleep, programming yourself by having an audio recording of that. So as you're falling asleep, you can listen to that. Great. Now, what do I do with that? Like, what are the kinds of things that you can put in that category? So the example I used was shifting your programming from like a perfectionistic attitude to, striving for that excellence in your life. It needs to be principles like these. I'm not a huge fan of falling asleep to the mantra of I am going to be a millionaire, or I am a millionaire. It actually shouldn't be going to be, or you'll always be in a state of wanting, right? So you also have to always phrase everything in the present tense as if it's happened or is happening in the present moment. But I'm not a huge fan of, asking yourself to like wake up and see $1 million in your bedroom. Now, I know that the way that the brain works is it problem solves. So if you've given it kind of a partial narrative, it's going to fill in the blank. But I think that there's even ways in which we frame this stuff that we could be helping ourselves out a lot better. So instead of being like, I'm going to be a millionaire, I am a millionaire, I am a millionaire, I am a millionaire, I would put your sight on something that's shifting your core belief behind that. So if what's impeding your ability to be a millionaire is that you worry all the time about money, hello, I am in that crowd. I don't know about you. So I was in the perfectionist crowd. I'm also in I'm a single mom. I'm going to be real, right? If it's really about the fact that you have a anxious relationship towards money in general, that's the impediment that you're trying to get past. So what I would program would be around, I can handle talking about money. I am comfortable talking about money. I like to look at the state of where I'm at in my budget. I am okay with the challenges that present themselves with money. It would be that kind of language that you'd want to frame. What would I be saying if I was somebody who lived not anxiously with her money, but competently with her money? Then record yourself saying that, then play that back to yourself. Maybe even lay some music over it. Listen, if I can make a podcast on my iPad with GarageBand, you can do this. This is not rocket science. There's a ton of free software on all of our devices out there or downloadable, easy enough to layer just a little, ambient music behind your saying these things. Fall asleep to it. See what happens. See if over the course of a week or two, you start to feel less like every time you see the mail with bills, right? If you're reprogramming around that, or a little less, oh, I missed it, I failed, when you watch yourself not feel perfect, if you're trying to achieve that excellence, right? Take whatever that narrative is and kind of litmus test, watch yourself over the next couple weeks, and you'll see that really you do start to move in that direction a little bit faster. Auto hypnosis actually works. Why haven't they been telling me this my whole life, right? Well, if you're seeing somebody like me in a clinical setting, I may have talked to you about this. This may not be the first time that you've heard this if you've had a therapist, but sometimes we don't know this stuff. We don't know everything, right? And so it really depends on who you're seeing and what kind of theories and techniques they're using and who they look to inform their practices. This isn't something that's commonly heard of, but it is something that the brain is primed to be able to use for itself. Theta wave state is our accelerated learning state. So we're going to catch on to things faster. We're going to be able to use them a lot better, but it has its limitations. It's not going to create I'm going to wake up and be speaking Mandarin the next day if I just fall asleep to listening to Mandarin. Although it could accelerate if I'm also doing that practice during my alpha and beta wave mental states. So it's kind of priming the pump, right, to shift some of that 90% of the background programming that runs my life. It's priming that, but you're still in your waking hours going to have to link it back to something. And this is why I think it's so valuable and why I was so appreciative that my, client had shared this with me, because I think it's so valuable when you're intentionally setting a stage. She was listening to my guided meditations, falling asleep for the purpose of switching some old programming that she was still kind of running up against in her life. And one of my guided meditations is on breaking old patterns and how to set new ones. And so that was the actual meditation she was listening to. And she was like, and it's working. And I'm like, that's because you must have had some programming in there that had been telling you all this time, this is going to be hard. It's going to be too hard. It's going to be too much work. I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I can do all that hard work, right? I can't do all that heavy lifting, or to me, 50 years to get here. Is it going to take me 50 years to get out? So she had this programming that was limiting her. I think this is really a good strategy when what we're up against is some limiting beliefs in our programming. And so what I'd encourage you to be thinking about is, do you have kind of those kinds of things in the background that you might want to try out recording yourself and setting it to a little ambient music and listening, listening to yourself as you fall asleep? Hearing that over time, you might see that shift a little bit, but you're not going to like wake up to money bags or brand new language. It's an accelerated learning state for that kind of background that the other stuff gets imposed on top of. And so if you're trying to impose new ideas that are not limiting on top of a limiting belief landscape, it doesn't take well, right? It's kind of like gardening. If you're not tilling the soil and preparing the soil, it really doesn't matter if you have a beautiful rose you're trying to plant. It won't take, right? If the ground isn't there. And so auto hypnosis isn't really like, I'm going to manifest all these amazing things in my life just by listening to this as I fall asleep. It doesn't really work like that. But what it can do is really take care of the soil that you're going to be planting seeds in with those things that you're listening to in that theta wave state. And then it might take off from there because you're really tilling that soil and fertilizing and taking care of that soil. And then the things in your waking hours that you're planting actually can take hold a lot better. I don't know. It's an interesting little trick. I started to kind of practice it throughout the summer because I had the conversation with my coaching client early in the summer. And I think it actually helped me through what I talked about in my previous podcast. If you haven't listened, go back. But I had this huge meltdown and I started to dabble in it. And I was dabbling in kind of setting the stage or tilling my garden around this idea of, I got this. Yeah, I got this. I totally can do this. Because I think there's a lot of programming from my childhood that was not about you got this. It was about not being good enough. It was about, I've shared on the podcast before, I came from an alcoholic family system. There's a lot of yuck that comes from alcoholic family systems. And I think, I was trying to kind of override a whole bunch of programs at the same time. But what I was dabbling in and the things that I've been listening to over the course of the summer as I fall asleep have to do with like, I got this, like, I've got life. I can handle this. I'm going to be okay. Like life is actually really kind of amazing and good. And I'm excited about it. So I had been planting messages like that. And I think that because that had already been done over the course of the summer, when I ran up against my meltdown that I talk about in the previous podcast, what I could tell is my body got still instead of frantic, which was interesting, right? And I think my limiting beliefs had been getting my body kind of frantic. And so then I had to get my body to be under control before I could get my thoughts under control. But my body slowed and that made me perk up, like, I gotta pay attention to this. I think I'm going to use my compassionate self-awareness here, which is a thinking strategy at the plant, right? I'm going to put that there. I think I'm going to do some of the do the next right thing stuff and some of the programming and conditioning sorting, which I did. And I think all of that was really primed and easily put into place because the limiting belief programs have really started to go out of my brain. And what's in my brain is, I got this. I've totally got this. Whatever comes my way, I got this. If it's happy and exciting and joyful, I am in it. I am present. I am not going to lose a moment of that experience. But if it's hard and it's stressful and it's whatever, I also got that. Like I just was priming myself to have kind of my garden, my soil be ready for whatever was coming my way. And I really think it paid off. So I was so grateful and have spoken to my coaching client since, like so grateful that she had reminded me how guided meditation had helped her and that she was listening to it at night because oh yeah, that's that Bruce Lipton stuff. That's that theta wave stuff. That's that. I've talked about this doctor before as well, but Dr. Joe Dispenza, like all of that kind of, they talk about these different brainwave states and how you can use your own theta wave state as kind of a cheat. It just goes faster and it accelerates the process of setting that stage. it isn't an overnight success necessarily. You don't wake up to money bags or I learn a new language overnight or all of that anxiety is gone just like that. But it definitely accelerates the process because it's setting in motion some new programming and taking care of, the soil in which everything else is going to get layered on top of. So I think you should try it. I'd love to actually hear from you if you do try it as well. So please be sure in the comments to come back and tell us what your experience is, or if you've used this before, because there are some great stories out there of a lot of people that really find auto hypnosis, using that theta wave state to be something that's very advantageous. Now, I've kind of banked it on you going to bed at night and listening as you go to sleep. But remember, even if you're just doing meditation on the regular, you're in a theta wave state in good meditative focused state. So if you've gotten to a point where you're doing that, you also can be implanting these ideas during that time as well. I mean, come on, it's right there and it's free. How about that? I gave you a new tool and it's free. So there you go. You can layer that on top of all the other freebies that I give you at learntoloveyourstory.com. And you can incorporate this in your life so that you can keep learning to love that story of yours and live that centered life that has you thriving instead of feeling like you're floundering.
All right, so I'm adding a little addition here. It's the legal stuff. Just so you're aware, nothing in any of these podcasts constitutes actual psychotherapy. Yes, I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, but everything here is just educational in nature and is a suggestion of things that you could be doing in your own life to learn how to love the life that you're in instead of waiting for a life that you're dreaming of to come towards you. So just remember, this is not therapy. And if ever you need any resources for mental health, look in my notes and I'll always have a little blurb at the bottom where you can click on a link and get those services for yourself.